Woke up this morning, checking out if my body's fine. Maybe I can use my legs to go out of my bed, to wash my face, clear my mind.
But when I ask people to show me your credential as a Jew, and then you say, well, I don't need no credential. Why don't you? So if you don't need one, why would I need it? I said, I need Yehudi. It is because that there's an expectation that I'm supposed to look more like you. But I'm going to pass it on because the Talmud says the Jew, L'Adam lo Ashkenazi, lo Kushi. The Jew is more like boxwood. He has the color of sandalwood, neither black nor white, more of an intermediate shade. And so we should all strive to understand ourselves as an intermediate shade, not as in a racial context, which is totally connected to the American ideology, an American psychology, an American idea of who's in and who's out.
The issue as presented is one that is prevalent. If you look in papers, you look on websites, etc. This is the claim. The Israelites claim that they are descendants from ancient biblical Israelites. And they make the statement as if it was some kind of cuckoo off the box thing that says that you're from some kind of cultish far out way. So here's what my
it's in quotation.
So here's what my question is. What does every other Jew in the world claim?
That's true.
How did the state of Israel get there? Where was their deed? The deed that they proclaimed that the League of Nations that then became the United Nations gave them the state of Israel was the Tanakh. They said we're these people. This is our land. So the question now becomes, if it's far out that we actually believe that we are a part of the descendants of this ancient people, who we have in the book of God chronicled to show how that could work. The issue is everybody else believes the same thing, but it's not looked at as if it's strange or wild
Or out of the question.
or out of the question. For people that as a nation was born out of Egypt. Just think about this now. As a nation, we went down into Egypt as a family. We came out as a nation, out of Egypt, right? They thought Moses was an Egyptian when he ran into Jethro, right? My only point is, if the idea of us thinking and believing and standing on the principle and the premise that we are descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if that's ludicrous, so is everybody else's stance that says that. Everybody. Because you have to be able, just like the rabbi said, where's your proof that you're connected to Jacob, to Isaac, to Abraham? So this is why we have to get away from these givens. You know, like in math, and I close with this, in math they say x equals 2 solve for y. Right? The given is X, you don't even think about it. It's a given. We go into these conversations with these givens that aren't provable. Right? You go into these conversations with these givens that says, well, you know, we are them. How did that become a given? And who gave you permission to make that a given? So we have to, you know, all, like I said earlier today, humble ourselves. Right? Everybody got to humble themselves.
In the face of history.
Thank you, Reverend.
Everybody has to be.
Here's my, or if there was someone else wanted to take another question.
I just have to go back, I'm sorry, but I have to revisit this, because it's intellectually dishonest to say you're Ashkenazi and completely ignore genealogy. If you're talking about biblical, in the biblical genealogy, Ashkenazi is the descendant of Japheth. So you cannot say, I'm a descendant, where I landed. Now, because I landed here, I'm no longer from that line. We're talking about genealogy here. We're talking about science and history and genealogy. So I've always had that. I've been an Israelite all my life. And I've always had that question. How could you be Ashkenazi and then say I'm Semitic? You're one or the other. You're from Japheth's line or you're from Shem's line. Period. Yes, please. Yes, please. Please do.
Yeah. So Ashkenaz is a term that was used for Germany, and as the rabbi said, that's where they landed in Germany, in the Rhine. So it wasn't about their line from Ashkenaz in the biblical line, it's physically where they landed in the Rhineland.
And I'm saying to you, that doesn't make sense.
We had this have a discussion. This is not a debate. It's not a debate. There's no back and forth. If I'm gonna run this, can't be no back and forth. If I'm not gonna run it, I'll get up and leave. But I do not go into back and forth and answer a question, ask a question, get the answer. Move on.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak from my perspective on being a born Hebrew Israelite. I didn't know anything else but being a Hebrew Israelite. And actually, I was told I was a Hebrew, period, back in the days. We didn't use Israelite as much. But we said I was born Hebrew, and that's what's on my birth certificate. And what I remember growing up, and I grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Dominantly Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish, Polish, German. And it was during the 1940s when they were in Brownsville, and we came into Brownsville as well, and the blacks and the Jews didn't have a problem. There was no issue as to whether you were a Hebrew or not, and we were only very few of us that claimed to be, and which we are, Hebrew Israelites. My sisters all went to yeshivas, my older sisters, and they're at least 80 years old. I'm shy of 70. I didn't know anything else but being a Hebrew Israelite. You say Jew, I don't have a problem with that. I don't even have a problem saying Jewish, depending on who I'm talking to. You know, because I believe in being politically correct. And you have to be what you got to be wherever you are. But I know who I am. I'm Shemitic. I was told I was Shemitic from the time I was born. I've been doing Torah from my mother's womb. My grandmother is a Hebrew Israelite. My mother's a Hebrew Israelite. And we never questioned it. And we were never questioned. And if we were questioned, it was by African American people because they didn't understand at that time. Remember, we're in a diaspora that's been 400 years. And if, you know, I remember being asked by someone that was Jewish, I didn't know it was so many of you. And I said, I didn't know it was so many of you keeping the African culture. Because I grew up in an African cultural house. But when I got out to go to school, I became more familiar with the Jewish Ashkenazim because they were our principals and our teachers in the school system. And most of the synagogues were not that large synagogues at that time. They were in houses on Sutter Avenue, Blake Avenue, Belmont Avenue, Pickett Avenue, and we were never questioned as to why you are a Jew. They knew that we were a Jew. And they knew that we were coming into the knowledge of ourselves. It's been a long haul of us finding out who we are. But also, know that in the South, when those slave ships came here, they brought us from Africa. They knew who we were when they brought us here. And the ones that sold us into slavery knew who we were when they sold us. Because they didn't sell their people, they sold Israel. And it was we're now dealing with all this, but we really didn't have to deal with a lot of this before. You see, in South Carolina, there's a people called the Gullah. And we have some Gullah people here. The word Gullah comes from the word galut, which means exiled. Those people know that they're Hebrew. They know that they're Israelites. We have a Gullah sitting in the back here. My husband is from the Gullah's community down there. When you go into the South, people are still keeping camp meeting, which is Sukkot. Even though they're Christians, they are still following the laws. There are things that they are still doing. They're still circumcising their babies. They're still keeping camp meeting during the same period of time that we kept Sukkot. So although you may have people that have been adopted to religion through indoctrination, that's it. We was indoctrinated into keeping Christianity. We don't look at ourselves as a religion because we were a nationality. We are broken nationality scattered throughout the four corners of this earth. We migrated out of Judea, but prior to that we was all over. The 10 tribes had already been scattered and taken. But the last group of us that came through that Atlantic slave trade came knowing that we were Hebrew Israelites, and that's what they were stripping away from us. They didn't want us to know that. They did not want us to know our identity. So we couldn't read about it or anything. So that's who I know I am. That's who we know that we are. Thank you.
Sue, do you have another question?
I have some comments. And I know at least one person at this table knows that I have lots of comments and questions. Listening to you, I'm thinking about me as a young teen, as a bat mitzvah girl. I was raised in a Reform synagogue. And I remember being surprised. I don't even know that I knew the word Ashkenazi. I may have heard it, but I didn't think about it when I was bat mitzvah. And I remember around the time I was confirmed, there was a photo of one of our synagogue's members, near the Judaica shop or someplace where they had old photos and old pieces of Judaica. And it was a photo that he had been born in Cairo. And I had heard my rabbis say, there are Jews everywhere. I had heard the history of the Silk Road and Jews who across the Silk Road because we could speak one language at various stops. I hadn't brought that into modern times, even then. And I can honestly say to this group of very religious Jews that I remember the first time I saw a black man in my shorts. And so like many of us, in various ways and communities across the country and the world, I grew up with blinders on. And one of the things that I found so interesting is during my aging of opening up my blinders, I was born in 61, and so I remember the 60s, and I remember the 70s, and I remember how blacks and Jews were in this little Ashkenazi house, separate. But we had a lot of the same challenges. The ultra-white nationalists, clearly I'm white. Clearly my skin is Caucasian. But in a lot of ways, they don't see me as white because I'm not Christian. Right. So for me, when I thought of white nationalism, it has always gone around with Aryan, for want of I don't even know if that's the right word. It was almost Nazi-like. It was like, we are. And I grew up knowing that whatever else we shared, we were hated. And what I realize now also is that, I remember the first time I met a Sephardic Jew was when I was 16 in a confirmation class in Israel, and we were staying in a moshav, and the family we stayed in was from Algeria, and I was like, Algeria, like, oh, we're everywhere, like, it was just, and I think we all need to kind of remember that we are mutually hated by a lot of people. And the thing about Jews, no matter their race or their ethnicity, is what I always heard was that we lost the temple when we started arguing amongst ourselves.
Not only did we lose the temple, we lost the land.
We lost the land. We lost it all. And what we're looking at now, everybody kind of grows up in their way, but there are a lot more Sephardi Jews than I even imagined. When you said that there are black communities that are no longer what I would call Jewish in the religious sense of the word, and yet they observe Sukkot. They light candles. Also, when the Sephardi went to Latin America after the expulsion from Spain, we know that there are Latin communities and Latin people out there who light candles Friday night and don't fully understand why.
Or bake challah.
Or bake challah.
Or make matzah. They are secret Jews.
And they're so secret they may be secret for themselves. Right.
And they understand the hidden ones.
That's right.
And so when we begin to really fully understand the complexity of what the world has created, although George Washington wrote a letter to bigotry no sanction to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island, the book, the letter is there. And when George Washington visited that synagogue, they actually draped over the chair where he sat. And that drape still is existing in the Torah Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. But with all of what George Washington hoped for the Hebrew people, because that's what they were called, the Hebrews, there were no Jews. They were called Hebrews at that particular time. So the term Judaism has evolved over not even a millennium. No more than like maybe 120 years or so to begin to evolve. So when we take these things into consideration, when you say that we are like, there were covenants in Illinois. I don't know about New York and I don't know about other places, but there were covenants in the state of Illinois where Jews could not live. There were certain suburbs in the state of Illinois that a black could be in the town because it was a sundown town.
Yes, sir.
So blacks had to be out by sundown. You could go to work there, but when the sun was setting,
I'm there.
our synagogue is located in an area called Marquette Park.
Thank you.
When Martin Luther King marched in Marquette Park, Martin Luther King said of his experience that day, he had never felt the hatred anywhere in the South that he felt in Marquette Park that day. The building that our synagogue is in today, the rabbi contacted the organizers of the King March and said if Martin Luther King needs a safe place to stay, he can come into the synagogue. Against every other officer's wishes, that did not want Martin Luther King mixed up with and he said, no, the righteous thing to do is to make our place available as a safe haven for Dr. King. Why was this so bodacious? Less than a mile away from the synagogue was the headquarters of the American Nazi Party, who marched in Marquette Park every weekend. But this rabbi, 5 feet 3, his name, I'll never forget his name, Schultz. His son is a member of his grandson is a member of our congregation today. Because of the actions of his grandfather. And what his grandfather stood for. And stood on. It's about principle. Principle is not attached to whiteness. It's not attached to blackness. It's about principle. It's about righteousness. If we're seeking to live principled lives and righteous lives, we can all get along.
And it's not invested. When he was living classic, Whitman and Schwerner, they grew up in my neighborhood.
But we have to do some things today. We can, yeah, come on. Okay. But after the rabbi makes his comment,
Okay.
please come and have a seat, sir.
Because, sure, what I want to do is start suggesting some solutions.
Yes.
Right? Because I think even from the few questions that we've had, we understand what the problem is and how it relates to race and definitions of race. So what I want to do is to offer a solution as to how we think about who we are, whatever you call yourself now. Because we just had a beautiful service this morning in the Torah Center of Belishlock, and Jews all over the world read the same section of the Torah. Those who might be listening, or if this is recorded, this is the passage in the Torah when it talks about the children of Israel going through the divided sea. And Jews all over the world read that. Right? Now the question is, as a thought exercise, what do they think when they read those stories? Right? The problem is, I think many of them, they read it, they believe that it's talking about their ancestors, but they are imagining that those people are Ashkenazi like them. Right? So here, if you think about it, I'm a historian, right, chronologically, right, that at this time there won't be any Jews in Europe for thousands of years. Right? Mention the destruction of the temple, that's 70 AD. That starts the diaspora. And then Jews will eventually wind up in places called Ashkenaz. But that won't be for thousands of years. So at this moment when you're reading the Torah, right, at that moment in time, you're reading about people who all come from Africa. And so they would say, well, it took us 40 years to walk out. We have just come out. We haven't even made it to Israel yet. We're just passing through the Red Sea. So we are all Africans on our way to Israel, right? Now, Rabbi asked earlier, can you prove, if you ask a person to point to the map where your ancestors came from, they would have no problem pointing to North Africa and saying this is Egypt. Normally, if you say your ancestors come from Africa, that means you are black. Right? Or do you, kind of participate in what's called white supremacy, which is the whitening of all of this, right? The last thing I'll say in terms of commonality to my friend here, I want to suggest a book called How Jews Became White by Karen Brodsky. And what I like about her book, she's a sociologist, she goes all the historical research, but she's also Jewish. And she looks at it in her own family's history. And she says, as a middle-aged white woman, I'm a white Jew. But she says her parents, who were from Europe, long before the Holocaust, would never refer to themselves as white. Right? Because they lived in a world in America where there were restrictions on where Jews can live. Tight quotas on what schools they could attend. And so they knew this distinction. That's for white people. That's not for us. Your generation is comfortable in your whiteness. And this is the first generation of Jews almost anywhere in the world who could comfortably and confidently say, I'm white. Jews in Europe never could. right? They would not be confused. You know, this distinction, the Nuremberg laws of 1939 defined German citizen as Aryan, meaning any Semitic ancestry excluded you. So by definition, if you acknowledge that you have some Semitic origin, then you are by definition not white. And so when you think about that, whiteness is a status afforded to people in the society in which they live. That our history shows times, the majority of it, when all Jews were not considered white. And although American Jews now enjoy that status, it is a status that can be taken away. By the same people who gave it can suddenly start looking at you and saying, like they have before,
All right.
we were greater when we were purer, and then suddenly not think of you as white in the way that you have come to associate. So this is why I said, this is where we can have common ground. But if you start your genealogy in Europe, not in Africa, then you start with Ashkenaz. That's where you begin. So instead of starting there, start with Abraham. Start with Isaac. Start with Jacob. Start with Moses. And if you start there, then that's where we all begin from.
Mine might not be a question, but I just want to tell you something.
But now, I want you to do this here. I want you to like take 3 minutes. If you don't have a question, you have
I
a
do
statement.
have a question too, but first I want to tell you something. I'm into genealogy. One of my friends wrote a book on the Loeb family. He was a genealogist, traced the Loeb family that was the synagogue where Rabbi Capers was saying about, the Torah synagogue, and Sephardic Jews, because it came from Spain. Then another thing I just want to tell you, then my question after that. Another friend of mine, she's a genealogist and everything, she lived in Miami. She didn't know she was Jewish. She went to a camp, she hits this girl, what are you doing? And she found out that she's sweeping up stuff, like, when you find out that you're Jewish, you have like this tradition, how you sweep a room and stuff like that. And she was finding her mom doing that. And then she got married, she was unhappy with the Catholic religion. So she went to a Reform synagogue, didn't like that. Then she went to a conservative, she didn't like that. She went to an Orthodox. Her mother kind of disowned her, but when her grandmother died, she gave her Jewish earrings. Because they were from Spain or Portugal or somewhere in Spain, I think, or Cuba or something. And they hid Jews I forget what they call it. It starts with a C. No, not converse. I forget the name of it, but anyways, it was very interesting, her story. You know, because it's the Sephardic Jews she does, about Sephardic Jews. Anyways, my question is, I'm seeing synagogues, conservative synagogues are hurting a lot of synagogues. You don't see them that crowded, some closed, some went this way, and you don't see that many people going on only on the high holidays they come out. Now, what about your synagogue? Do you get a lot of people, or are you hurting, or what? Because I want to know about that. Because I see conservative is always hurting.
That's a good question. Our attendance has gone down since the pandemic. So we opened up about a year and a half ago. We reopened the synagogue. But we began broadcasting our services during the pandemic. So you know what? People roll out of bed, get a cup of coffee, turn their computer on. And now they got so sophisticated, the computer's hooked up to the TV, so they got the service on large screen TV. And I've had people say, what prayer book are we having? What prayer book are we using? And so I can buy the prayer book, and they order the prayer book. This rabbi said to people one time, if you go stay at home, at least get dressed for service. Don't come to service in your pajamas. Please get dressed for service. But our congregation is, even more specifically to your point, our congregation is aging. And an aging congregation, our members live as far as 60, 70 miles away from the synagogue. We're located in the heart of the city. Our members live everywhere. And so we had been trying to do, we had a nice crowd out for Pesach. We had a decent crowd out for Yom Kippur. We had a good crowd out for Rosh Hashanah. But other than that, I'm begging and praying to get more folk out. And so it's just not the Ashkenazi community. It's every community that this pandemic was rough on.
Yes, now, for my family and our generation that came up, it was very different. We didn't have any Ashkenazi or Sephardic ways. We strictly came out of those that knew themselves as Hebrew Israelites, came from the South. We knew about Tahada, which I am a Tahada teacher. And we knew that just being in the South, there are certain things that we're supposed to do, which has been brought down from us coming out of slavery. It never left. It was by word of mouth. So at my Knesset, we was just straight Torah. You know, we were not in Talmud or anything of that nature. We went to school. They started sending us to the yeshiva so that we can learn a little bit more. And they would say, you need to go over there and get it because they got your history. You know, we used to hear that a lot. You know, so you finally eventually saw them maybe put on a prayer shawl, which we didn't have the same prayer shawls. You know, we didn't have the same service. Now we have incorporated, where we are, we incorporated it so that when people who are of the Talmud and things of that nature will be comfortable when they come into our synagogue. So we have a lot of the ancient ways, we do a lot of the ancient things, but we also incorporated some of the Jewish customs in our congregation. So you'll see that we'll do the prayers, we'll do the Mata Buddha, Damalam, we'll do all of those things, Ashdei, we'll do those things. But prior to me growing up, I didn't do that. I just straight Hebrew Israelite, straight out of Torah, and all of those things from Talmud and different things. And you know, my sisters went to Halakha, some of them. So we have a mixed community in my family. So we know a little bit of everything. I got family in Badayan and Israel. My daughter just came back from Israel, living there for 10 years, thanks to the rabbi. You know, and so we incorporated everything so that everyone can be comfortable when they come. You know, so we didn't have that. I remember talking to Deborah about Hanukkah because we were taught that there was something that burned for 8 days. They found some oil and all of that, and we knew that that was a myth. So it became a conversation in the community. Did it really burn for 8 days? So we are backtracking as Hebrew Israelites to find out what is our real part of our culture that we lost. But we didn't do certain things. But now sometimes we're learning more. We're learning more about ourselves as we go in.
So everybody is learning more. And everybody that calls themselves an Israelite is not a part of the International Israelite Board of Rabbis. Some communities don't even use the term rabbi. Some communities, there are very different terms. That's why I made the statement very early on that when you're talking about Israelites, you have to necessarily identify the group of people that you're talking to, that you're talking about, because they're not all the same. They're absolutely and unequivocally not all the same. Just as all Jewish people are not the same, they are divided into various denominational groups, and I never knew that there was humanistic Judaism. Humanistic Jews don't even believe in God, but they got that right. They have that right. This is America. So for me, our community identifies as traditional, and that means it can mean whatever we feed into it, traditional. So we don't identify as Reformed or conservative or Orthodox, but we do identify as traditional because the traditions that we have established and are changing and growing, and I believe that we have to continue to be eclectic and going places and seeing things that you like, and then to get understanding of what's going on, and see if there's a way for you to incorporate that in what you do. So that's for me.
Shalom, everyone. My name is Rabbi Prince Hezekiah Yehuda. Some of you know me. With all this burgundy, you can't miss me, right? But no, you've heard my wife spoke, Princess Rabbanit Zarita Yehuda. I know she did a great job, right? My wife and I from two different schools. My wife comes up in the time of the 1940s. Her place of worship was called Tabernacle, Israel. The Tabernacle was known for have the priests. The priests and high priests, there were a priest we call Knesset in the 40s. I came up later on in a place called Bnei Zakim, and a young man coming from the south of South Carolina. And our ways of practicing are different, as one said. We were considered the ancient. We were more like it's called Mizrahi, Moroccan Jews, as you see, wear turbans and the various things. So sometimes people mistook us for Muslims, for Sikhs, for many things. But when you find out Israelites, Jews, Hebrews around the world, we're different things. And so along the line, as the rabbi said, a lot of the Israelites did not go with the term rabbi. They were even using Moreh. Some of us has titles of Nasi. The Nasi title comes from Torah. We go right from Torah. If you look at the Torah and the other books from the 39, from the Genesis to Malachi, you're not going to see the term rabbi in there like that. So they went under the terms of Nasi and so forth, and that's what we did. A lot of us crossed over to learn, as I said, to be integrated with a lot of things, to blend. A lot of Israelites do not keep the same, do not read the parasha that you may read every week, but we do, because we want to be unanimous with what's going on. So there's various things, but one thing about it, they all do Torah.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes,
And let me give you one of the differences. Whereas under kashrut, many of the Israelites may not go under this term kashrut. Okay, they go under tahor, which is Leviticus, Sefer Yikra, the 11th chapter. You got to understand. So there's subtle differences. Let me explain some things to you. And where it's come to your rule of eating, let's say dairy products and meat, many Israelites don't follow that. Some do. Only because it talks about seething the kid in his mother's milk, which many Israelites believe that it has nothing to do with dairy and meat. But there were different rabbis, as you know, had different opinions about that. When it came to, let's say, interesting Friday nights. On a lot of the Friday nights, many of the Jews believe that you can cohabitate. Israelites, no. Why? Because in Torah it lets you know when the seed of copulation makes you unclean. And if the Creator told Moshe to stay away from the wives for 3 days when it comes to the mountain to wash their clothes, well, how can you cohabitate? Unclean and clean does not mix in Torah. So there are various differences when it comes to things like that. We're very strict with those type of things. Okay, so this settled, but yet we all keep Torah in that way. So the way we understand things may be different. But a lot of us has learned many of the different things, so we can now be in tune with everyone else. We don't have a problem with doing the rabbinical way. Again, I didn't come from that. Okay, and also I came from South Carolina. Rabbi Yeshua is my cousin biologically, but we didn't know that till several family reunions ago. In South Carolina, there's a day that's kept called, what was it? Camp meeting. For 7 days, as it's 8 days, the same as Sukkot. Same as Sukkot. A lot of my family comes from the Gullah Islands in South Carolina. A lot of the same traditions that we did in Israel. We have our Princess Sarah, who family also from Gullah Islands. So a lot of things that we call other names in South Carolina. For 8 days, what happened is they go out to a campground and they have their tents and huts. And in the middle is a sanctuary. They still practice it. And every month, I remember my grandfather used to hold, every new moon, he hold his crops up and his money up too, and bless them. And the various things that we see now, so the traditions, a lot of times, were passed down to us, you just may not have known it. So it's always been with us in many different things and many different ways, but you just don't know it. And now, as far as the Reform, Orthodox, this is what I often tell people. Those things were made by people, men, women. You never see in the scripture where the Creator talks about any of that. He's talking about being Zadik or righteous and Tamim. That's it.
That's right.
So we develop conservative, Reform, Democratic, Republicans. It's about being right. That's the whole thing. And eventually, as it's written, and if you want to know, read the scriptures, it tells you what's going to happen. See, the thing about Jews, Israelites, Hebrews, we know what's going to happen in the future. It tells us. There's one scripture we read last week where the Creator said, I'll make an end of all other nations. And there are those that are going to be gathered to you, Israel. And that the nations that don't come up to keep Sukkot, Egypt won't get rain. So one day all nations will be keeping Sukkot. And I have another question to say, well, listen, if Abraham asked, it came down to what, 10 righteous men? If they're found in Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, first of all, well, why would 10 men be righteous in Sodom? No, think about it. Just think about this. Let me ask you, think about this. No. Why would they? But here's the thing. There was always other people who was righteous. But not on the same measurement as Israel. All nations are responsible for some sort of righteousness. There's a plumb line in the earth.
That's right.
Why would the Creator send Jonah to Nineveh? It's not just us. My point is, this is about the Creator of the universe. It's not about us. It's about bringing people right. And then last, I'll close, because I know they're throwing the daggers aside. And the last thing is that says that, again, my house will be a prayer for all people. So, just keep going on, and it'll all be answered, but the answer is in your scriptures. Shalom, shalom.
Speech. So I mentioned upstairs, I'm kind of like a 10-year-old as far as connecting the dots. So I don't get, to be honest. I mean, I so respected everybody's eloquent responses to the questions. I mean, we're Jews, Israelites, call it what you want. I mean, that's all you need. What I want to know is, I want to know who my fellow brethren are. Having Azrael and I mean, Rabbi Funeh and I have stayed in touch over the years, so we've gotten to know each other. And Eliyahu's gorgeous family. Stefania, Shade, wherever they may be. I mean, coming every Shabbos together, we get together. I mean, it's our Shabbos regular services, but having them here has enhanced the quality of my life, and that's the thing about being Jewish, you know. And there's just so much that we can gain from rubbing elbows with each other and you know, being there for each other. I don't get the whole Ashkenazi Israel. I mean, I want to know who strives to live their life by Torah's precepts.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
It's a struggle. It's a struggle. My whole life, it's a struggle. I'm not like one of these guys who naturally came out of the womb and I'm this good guy. What I would say though is, whatever decent things I've accomplished in my life have been because I've tried to live by Torah's precepts, and all of you you're more committed, at least you're more committed than I am to that type of lifestyle. That's what people should know, but that's what people should embrace. As far as the mention here, my sister who was rolling on the ground, but thank you.
So, just closing out with a comment, I just want to comment on top of what he was saying. You know, according to the Torah, anyone who's following Torah is your brother and she is your sister. It says that God is no respecter of person. That means he doesn't care if you're green, blue, purple, black with polka dot and stripes. He says the stranger that's within your gates that's following Torah, the natural born or the stranger, you are brothers. And that's what we want to take away from here today. We're not trying to fight over if you're Ashkenazi or if you're Hebrew Israelite or if you're conservative, reform, or any of those divisions. It's divisions. The book of Jeremiah, I believe it says that God's people, God said that my heritage has come unto me as a speckled bird. And all the birds around you are against you. And that's the common thing that we have, whether you're black or white or whatever. Toda Rabah.